Welcome everyone to Inside Out, conversation about wealth and philanthropy. And this is sponsored by the Leadership Story Lab and ALUMinate. Today, we're gonna book two trends. First trend is, if you've been to any presentations, webinar, seminar at all, this is the pattern. You have expert or a panel of experts, they talk, they impart their wisdom on you, and then they talk some more, and then not until the very end, the last 5, 10, maybe 10 minutes of the 60 minutes do we really get to the Q&A part. But Q&A part is the best part, almost always the best part. So we're gonna turn this thing on its head. The whole thing today, 90 minutes, is going to be Q&A based on some of the things that we have been researching, asking questions, as well as a heavy doses of questions that you guys have submitted. Number two trend is that, as you've indicated with us as part of your registrations, that majority of the participants today are fundraisers, nonprofit executives. And we're talking about philanthropy. Fundraisers tend to learn from other fundraisers. That's a no-brainer, right? You learn from people who are more senior, who are more experienced, who have been more successful, on and on and on. But today we're gonna hear from donors. We're gonna learn from very active donors who are opening up the hood to let us poke in a little bit and see what their world is like. And not only are they opening up the hood, as my conversation revolves around the topic of wealth and philanthropy, they're also opening up their hearts. So just by sitting here, participating in this panel, you're bucking two trends. You are trendsetters. So I am going to turn on the recorder because I have been asked too many times, I can't attend, can you please record? Okay, we'll record. And we'll understand that if you want to stay invisible, but also know that it's really hard for speakers to talk to a panel of dark tiles. So I would think that speaker view is the best so that you can see who is talking. And we're going to troll through a ton of questions based on three main topics, okay? This is organized chaos. I love it, I think you'll love it too. But as we troll through these three main topics, if you have burning questions, type it in chat. And my colleague, my business partner, Bob Fealy, Bob, can you wave your hand or say something? He is going to monitor the chat. And I've given Bob full permission to interrupt me if and when he sees the questions that, ooh, it's so good, everybody stop. Let's ask this question. All right, last thing is we're gonna do raffle. We're gonna raffle off Jen and Lisa and my book, one book per topic segment. And my colleague, Rena Conso, who's gonna be, if everybody can mute yourself, that would be wonderful. Rena's gonna just randomly appeared and let us know it's raffle time. And then she's gonna combine modern technology that is Zoom with old school technology that is a dice. She's gonna roll it 3 times, and then we're gonna determine who the winner is gonna be. You must be present to win. All right, so let me share my screen really quick. I don't like PowerPoint, but PowerPoint has its place. And so this is all I am going to kind of anchor us with some visuals that the 3 big topics of today would be: what is wealth? And what is first generation wealth creators' relationship as well as struggle with it? The second segment will be something that's easy said than done. And that is, Given the inherent unequal power dynamics between fundraisers and major gift donors, what are the best ways for fundraisers to get to know donors' stories? We all know that authentic relationship is important, and we all know that sharing, telling, asking, collecting stories would be the way to get there. But given that inherent in unequal power dynamic, how are you supposed to broach that? And last topic would be, is win-win possible in this scenario? Because how can fundraisers reach their goals while being empathetic as well as helpful to their donors? Okay, so these are the three segments, major segments that we're going to visit today. Now, I want to state something obvious, but maybe uncomfortable. I think as a donor, as a faculty member, I think fundraising, major gift fundraising, is one of the most bizarre and awkward and difficult and yet noble work. Difficult and noble, I think it's quite intuitive, but let me talk about the bizarre and awkward part. The Brookings Institute economist Isabel Sahel has once observed this about people, that we rather talk about sex than money, and we rather talk about money than class, socioeconomic class. And by definitions, first-generation wealth creators have traveled classes. And that's one of those travel migration, in fact, experience that unless you've done it yourself, it's really hard to explain what it's like. Oh, wait, but we don't like to talk about money and class. And the pink elephant in the room is that major gift fundraisers typically are not major gift donors. And even more rare are they first generation wealth creators themselves. So you have two groups of people who need to come together, who need to figure out how to work together in order to support the millions of great work that our nonprofits have been doing on behalf of us. Imagine our society without most of these nonprofits. Majority of their work cannot be done without funding. So how are we supposed to tackle this? Well, first, I think I'm going to invite Lisa Greer, one of our first panelists. By the way, I'm not going to do any extensive bio reading, elaborate introductions, because their bio combined, it's going to take 30 minutes. Instead, I think I'm going to let their stories do the work. I'm going to tell you just enough about them so that you have context. And I'm going to let their expertise and experience and their personal stories really tell you who they are. So Lisa Greer, she's the author of this amazing book, Philanthropy Revolutions. And I don't think she picked the word revolutions lightly or in an exaggerated way. Lisa was a former media executive, entrepreneur, investor, and a very, 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 very active philanthropist. So a lot of you have very tactical how-to fundraising questions. I was just surprised that this book basically answered 90% of it. And it's a very rare hybrid of her story, the research she's done after talking to hundreds of donors like her, as well as her advice on the how-tos. But there's one part that really hit me, and this is the part that I'm going to ask Lisa to read on page 88. After the IPO event of her husband's company, something happened. Lisa, would you care to tell us what happened?
I will. And hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here. This is super exciting. And Esther's just amazing, but you all know that. So I'm going to read this to you, and if I get sort of weird and choked up, it's only because every time I think about what happened, it's been 10 years, but I start getting choked up again because I can see every moment of it, because it was so dramatic in my life and all of our lives, my family, and then we were with another family on this yacht. So I will read the story. It's pretty quick. And it's 100% true, possibly even minimized a little bit. Might have even been a little more outrageous. So it's called, the chapter's called Unthinkable, Our Introduction to Power and Position. To celebrate after our IPO, we planned a once-in-a-lifetime cruise aboard a private yacht that would take us from Greece to the UK. My older kids weren't interested in a family trip, so we just took our twins, who were 5 years old at the time, and Josh's parents, my husband's parents, as well as some friends. Another friend was celebrating a big birthday, so we took him as well. When we picked up the yacht in Rhodes, we could hardly contain ourselves. It was incredible, like nothing we'd ever experienced. Also incredible was the staff, who immediately put us at ease. First, we'd visit my uncle. Years ago, this uncle had decided to escape the horrors of capitalism, in his words, by moving to the remote Greek island of Ikaria, where he lives off the land. With this part of our itinerary settled, we departed the next morning from Rhodes and planned everything around that. Only as we left the harbor, the yacht lurched, toppling a beautiful vase with roses in it in our stateroom. Crew told us everything was fine, but I had a feeling over the course of that day, they came in and picked up the glass and the whole thing, but I had a feeling that the crew's behavior wasn't normal. Now, I don't really know normal because I'd only been on a boat for, 12 hours, but still. I finally convinced the captain to tell me why. It turns out that when the ship had lurched so dramatically, the chef, who was preparing lobster below deck, had been scalded by a massive pot of boiling water, resulting in burns to both of his feet. While the chef had insisted, despite his pain, that he worked through the injury, it was becoming increasingly clear that the burns were serious. The poor man needed a hospital. "Oh my God," I said, "let's get him to a hospital. Why didn't you tell us right away?" Apparently, the captain hadn't wanted it to ruin our day. He went on to explain that the only reason he was, quote, troubling me with the information at all was to, quote, warn me that we wouldn't be able to eat dinner on the yacht that night. We'd have to make arrangements in Rhodes at a restaurant. Over and over again, he apologized for the, quote, inconvenience and the improper dinner we'd be forced to eat at port, and the offense. The offense? Unfortunately, it gets worse. When the chef appeared later, ready to disembark, he was wearing heavy shoes on his 2 burned feet. Again, I found the captain and I said, "Why is the chef wearing shoes? He must be in a lot of pain." He said the chef was embarrassed. He said he didn't feel it was right that you should be subjected to seeing his feet. I still remember the look we shared, Josh and I, when we understood how much the crew had tried to spare us, or worse, protect us with someone's health in the balance, and only because we were rich. And we both said to each other, what kind of terrible world have we entered? Thanks.
What kind of terrible world have you entered? Next, I would like to ask Jen Risher. Jen, would you wave to everybody, please? Hi, everybody. Jen Risher. She is the author of this very, very rare book called We Need to Talk, a memoir about wealth. And this book took her 13 years. And very, very, very seldomly do you even get people to admit to the fact that, yes, we're wealthy. They might admit to fellow peers. It's like there's this radar, but very rare do you get to hear someone who open up their entire heart to the stories, the journey, the struggles to wealth. To wealth. Are you kidding? Jen used to work for Microsoft in the early 90s, and that's where she met her future husband, David, there as well. And David later on left to work for this little company called Amazon. And so between the two of them, there were a little bit of stock options. And so that, although that changed her life, it hasn't changed the fact of who she is, and yet it changes the way people saw her. So now Jen currently is also a very active philanthropist, and she and her husband are co-founders of this amazing campaign called Half My Daff. We'll talk about Half My Daff later, But let's first welcome Jen. And here she had a couple of vignette stories that she wanted to share with us to illustrate what her world was like. What is it like to be wealthy? Jen?
Thank you. Thanks, Esther. Thanks everyone for being here. Wealth surprised me. And I want to say up front that money, of course, makes life easier, but it doesn't look or feel like what Hollywood sells us. Wealth can be isolating. And I felt the impact as a parent and as a sister and as a friend. And as a daughter, it was painful to suddenly feel my parents disapproved of what we had. 8 out of 10 people with wealth grew up middle class or poor, and were not talking to each other about the emotional challenges. And my goal with my book is really to help us move money out of the taboo category, to help us connect with each other, to help us learn from each other, and to help us as donors be better partners with nonprofits. So I'm going to share just a couple of stories that will just give you a little bit of an insight into some of the things that kind of came up, because I was surprised at the distance that wealth can create. And right at the time when my husband joined this small unknown startup that was selling books on the internet, and the company went public as Amazon, I also had a new baby. And as a new mom, this whole world had opened. It was like a curtain lifted. And suddenly I was so in love, and I couldn't believe how incredible it was. And I joined a mother's group, and we had so much in common. We talked about, pacifiers and breastfeeding and our in-laws and sleeping through the night. And we had such a bond, and we all shared so much. And at the same time, this other curtain had opened, and I had all this wealth. And in that space, there was silence. And I kept that silence in my mother's group. I didn't want anyone to know. I kept it as hidden as I possibly could. And looking back, I wish I'd had the courage to share what was really going on in my life, because what I was doing was I wasn't speaking in the name of being connected. But think about that. When you keep yourself hidden and keep hidden things that are going on in your life, how connected are you really? And disconnection can happen within families. And I'll share a story about my brother. So I have a brother who's 2 years younger. He went into the Peace Corps after college, and then he got a master's in Spanish and became a high school Spanish teacher. And this is many years ago. He was looking to buy a house. And my husband and I offered him $20,000 towards his down payment, but he refused our gift. He said he wanted to live within his own means. And at the time, his refusal hurt my feelings. I felt like he was looking down at me and down at our money, but I didn't say anything. Then a few years later, when he was getting married, my husband and I again sent a check as a wedding gift, and he accepted. And when his first child was born, we again sent money, and he and his wife thanked us. And we began to send money every year. And over the course of many years, he stopped acknowledging our gifts. I'd write a check in December, and hear only silence. It was like that check was disappearing into the void. And I began to feel resentful, and I felt taken for granted, but I didn't say anything. Instead, I told myself stories, and I made assumptions. And I think we often do this. We don't talk about money. Instead, we have stories we're telling ourselves in our heads rather than actually talking. So my story was, well, he's embarrassed, or, oh, he thinks we have so much money that it really doesn't mean anything to us. But then, and I'm not proud to admit this, just a couple years ago, I just didn't send a check. And when we were communicating over email, at the end of one of his notes, he said, wondering if a certain year-end check is just late in the mail. Is it? And I read that, and I was angry, I was shocked. And of course I knew we needed to talk, but it's not easy. We don't have experience talking about money, even within our people with that are closest to us. It was really uncomfortable. And I had to really think through what I felt, what I hoped to achieve. And I said, let's get on the phone. And I got on the phone and I said, my feelings are really hurt that you haven't thanked us for our gifts. And he apologized right away. He said he hadn't realized, and that actually he thought it was more comfortable for me if he didn't say anything about the money, which completely made sense given how we grew up. And then, as we talked and we connected as two human beings, two people that love and trust each other, we put money in its place, not as something bigger than the two of us, but as a tool. And then at that point, once our relationship was connected, we could talk about money as a tool. He said, I don't need this money, but I really appreciate it. And I said, I'd never asked. I said, I don't care what you're doing with it, but what are you doing with it? I want to know. I want to be part of your life.
Being part of each other's life, as well as telling us stories, ourselves stories about what's going on, what is going on with people we love, that can create a whole sort of multiple alternate realities that may or may not work. And one of the things that I was astonished, a few months ago, I was introduced to this book, 500 pages. It's hard to trot through this. The Rich in Public Opinion. It's based on 4 studies done in the US, UK, France, Germany, essentially assessing public opinion of the rich. And I think that underscore what Jen has been sharing with us, and it's even illuminating how brave she is sharing these stories with us. 500 pages, what is the book saying? I can summarize it for you with 2 words. It's bad. It's pretty bad. So with these things in mind, the world that Lisa and her husband and family realized that she's entering in after that incident, understanding the 2 stories that Jen had experienced as she became a new mom, new wealthy. Now I want to bring in our 3rd panelist, Scott Mordell. Scott was the longest serving, Scott is the longest serving CEO of YPO Global. In that role, he basically got to lead 30,000 leaders with whom he had no formal authority over. Carrot or sticks? Neither. And yet in his role, he's in charge of looking after the well-being and professional and personal development of 30,000 people around the world, just like Jen and Lisa. So Scott, welcome. I have a question for you.
Okay.
When we talked, one of the first things you shared with me was that you've observed that there's these timeless struggles with your members. What do you mean by that? Can you give us some examples?
Yes, and thank you. It's good to be with everybody. And thank you, Lisa and Jen, just really touching stories and just a perfect setup for where we're going and what really matters here. So thank you for that. YPO, we're in 140 countries, and what we really pride ourselves on is putting people together in what we call monthly forums. Basically, it's a personal board of directors where there's really only 2 rules, okay? Everybody has to be perfectly honest, and everything spoken is totally confidential, okay? And so I got into YPO. I was encouraged to join. I didn't think I belonged, all right? And I got thrust into a forum with a couple really big titans of Chicago. One was a big family business. Another was an entrepreneur business. There's 8 of us in this forum. 2 people have their own planes, have their own staffs. They've got all this just stuff around them that we would associate with wealth. A couple others are family business folks, but really working hard. And then there's me, who's a total working stiff, comes from a middle-class family in Detroit, and didn't have wealth, okay? I didn't have money that works for me while I'm sleeping, okay? Which is my definition of wealth. And in that sense, I show up at these forums and I've got this giant imposter syndrome. I don't think I belong. I just don't think I belong in YPO, but I'm going to give it a go. And I give it a go, and we sit in this room with these people who, just all tidied up as we would all attribute to wealth. And you know what? They've got the exact same problems you and I have. Okay, there's a net worth is not self-worth. They feel like some people aren't appreciating them. They're feeling just maybe they just shouldn't be in this role, or they've had this incredible luck, or they're having a bad relationship with their significant other, and that clouds everything that's happening in their world, or their kid's sick and they can't see straight because that's really, really challenging. It was striking to me just really how important it is for all of us to find some kind of validation, some kind of attention, some kind of recognition that we matter in a real way. And I've been reminded over and over again, Oprah Winfrey, when she finished her show, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the show that she had, but for 25 years, she had the Oprah Winfrey show. And after she closed off the show, she said, hey, I've talked to 30,000 people have sat in this chair right here, celebrities and just regular people and everything else. And every single one of them wanted the exact same thing. They wanted validation. They wanted to know that they mattered. And everybody's on that quest and has that sincere desire to be validated and to matter. And that's really resonated with me, because in YPO, in the role that I had, we're in 140 countries. 10,000 CEOs donate their time and their money to create YPO experiences. They don't have to do that. They can just write a check and mail it in, if you will, but they donate their time and their passion. And it's because of that connection that they get back. And it's because of the validation that they get for their participation. And it's because it helps them really realize and get energized by the fact that they matter. So these timeless truths of this idea that the world is all about people, organizations are all about people, and our work for charity and to make the world a better place is all about people is entirely true. And I think it's strung together really very much through a couple of these themes.
So thank you, Scott, Lisa, and Jen, although there are these shared timeless needs and struggles, my understanding is that there's still a wide gap between those who have the most worthy causes, most touching needs, met with people who can most afford to fund those needs. And yet, from teaching a major gifts strategy course at Kellogg for 6 years, I kept on hearing, where do we find more? How do we connect with more? More. Well, let's dive a little bit deeper into what Scott is saying, that we all need the fundamental acknowledgement. But what does it look like for first generation wealth creators? Jen and Lisa, what has surprised you most about having achieved wealth?
Should I step in, Lisa? I'll go first.
Go for it.
I think really it was the distance that money can create between family and friends, and that wealth really doesn't come with a handbook that tells you how to hire a good financial planner, how to come up with a philanthropic strategy, how to raise kids that aren't spoiled. We see the highly visible wealth. We know the Kardashians and I'm trying to think of the TV show, The Housewives. And we know that Jeffrey Epstein, and we know the parents who illegally tried to get their unqualified kids into top schools. We see those stereotypes, but that's a very narrow and incomplete view. Remember, 8 out of 10 people with wealth grew up middle class or poor, and they're so much more ordinary and so much more diverse than what we see. And the space that I entered was not the space I had seen from the outside looking in.
Thank you, Jen. Lisa?
Yeah, all of that for sure. And some of the things that I thought would happen didn't happen. I thought that I would have a deluge of people asking me for money. And one of the interesting things is it really didn't happen for a very long time, but it didn't happen from nonprofits, but it did happen from stockbrokers and real estate people. And they called within hours of our IPO, but it took about a year and a half for the fundraisers and the nonprofits to find us. And the thing that was very shocking to me was, in addition to everything that Jen said, is that it was difficult to give money to people. That was that there was a reticence, it felt like the wealthy people had a club and that we weren't in the club, and that by having money, we didn't get to join the club until someone said we were now in the club. So I call it the list. And so because of that, and people who've read the book know this, but it took 7 months for us to give $2 million to our hospital, where we had been very involved as sort of volunteers and had medical procedures done for years and all of that. I mean, our local hospital, and they just kept ignoring us. And I kept saying, we would like to give you a whole lot of money. This is a really important cause for us. My husband's had surgeries there. And then they would blow us off over and over again. It was the strangest thing. And I would have never believed that if I hadn't lived it. And it wasn't the only place where that happened. So that was incredibly shocking. And but the good part about it, I don't want to make it all negative. One of the parts that was surprising that was good about it is people ask me all the time, what did you find, what's the best thing about having money, or whatever it is? And obviously the best thing is that you can help other people and you don't have to worry about, am I going to be thrown out of my house or apartment? But the most surprising good thing was the access. And that was, I had never thought about that before. It was sort of just because once you're on the list, the access, and I'm sure Scott can tell you about this all day long, was just phenomenal. And I realized that if I want to learn from the biggest world's expert about something, I can just ask them. And it was a very strange thing because now I'm on sort of the list. I don't know that the list actually exists, but it's a list in people's minds. So I realized that you can actually, once you see that you have that access, you can actually use it for good. And that's been a really wonderful thing that I realized, and that was a surprise.
Scott, what has been, if you remember or have talked to members when you were part of YPO and as well as being CEO, what are some things that have surprised people?
I think Lisa and Jen are really touching on it, because it turns overnight. Once you're wealthy, you think you're the same person. Okay, when it happens, but people look at you very, very differently. And so this idea that I'm not just one of the people anymore. Okay, when it's the first, especially with the first generational folks, they have trouble just going through that evolution to straddle those lines. And it's, I'm still the same person I was when I grew up, here. And yet at the same time you are, but people don't see you that way. That's how you get on the list. And that's how you get in different places. And that's why you get invited to things, because people are starting to see you in different ways. And it takes a while for people to settle in and get comfortable with that. And I just see that over and over and over again, because we got 15,000 people in YPO who are first generation entrepreneurs. Okay. And they're playing forward, and they're all adjusting in different paths, and how their kids are getting treated is a big shock as well.
So let's talk about kids. Everybody worries about their kids. Everybody. In the set of 20 I've talked to, whether their kids are young, grown, past middle age, they have grandkids, they all worry about kids, and not in a sense that, am I still doing the right thing? And sometimes still wondering, have I done right by them? So let's talk about kids. One of the most dreaded questions from kids, we talk about how we see us, how you see yourselves, how other people see you. How do the kids see that all of this? Have you dreaded the questions, Mom, Dad, are we rich? How do you communicate wealth with your kids?
So I'll start if that's okay. So actually, Jen and I, when we first talked, we had a conversation about this, because her kids fit in the middle age-wise of my 5 kids. And I felt like I was the only person, and I have to say, I really did feel like I was the only person who had this issue until Jen and I spoke. And my little kids were 5 when it happened. And so they would come home and say things like, gee, I went on a play date and somebody has an apartment. Why do they have an apartment and we have a big house? So I kind of expected that stuff and I knew how to deal with it, and that was fine. What I didn't expect is my older children were supremely embarrassed by it, and they didn't want anybody to know about it. And it's been a decade, and I think at least one of them is still very uncomfortable with it. Like just, and he knows that we didn't make it because we did some bad thing in the world. It was all done, you know, very organically and naturally and all of that. But there is a guilt that comes with it. And I think that, you know, we have some of that too. And there is some of that imposter syndrome stuff that I think Scott was alluding to, but it was very, I was very taken aback. I was like, why wouldn't you want to give a bunch of this away? Or why wouldn't you want to give it to your own nonprofit that you work for? And they were just paralyzed. So that was my experience.
Thank you. Jen?
Yeah, I hear that a lot from parents who have older kids whose kids are embarrassed. Like, Mom, I don't want to invite anyone over to our house, or can you drop me off away from school because I don't want them to see my car. I mean, this is teenagehood is the height of when we want to be like our peers, right? And when there's this gap that you see or a difference that you see, you don't want that to happen. I mean, because ultimately, what do we all want? We want to be connected and understood. And there exists such a stigma around wealth that even as people who have it, you know, when our kids ask us that question, Mom, are we rich? It can be, you know, no one really wants to say, yeah, I'm rich, because of the connotation there. But I think it's really important. And this is why I think conversation is so important. The more we talk about these things, the more we normalize and validate the experiences. And when we don't talk about something, it just looms large and kind of takes on a life of its own. And this idea of we're rich becomes something really scary. So as a parent, I think it's really important to get comfortable with it for yourself so that you can then talk about it with your children. And it's a process.
Yeah. So how do you, your family, as well as how do you see other families communicate? And this is a question for Dr. Dennis Jaffe, a wealth expert. I'm so glad he submitted this questions. How do you see families communicate across generations when they have different concerns and interests and values embedded in the age, in the developmental stages, as well as they're just coming of age at different era? Scott, can we actually start with you on this? And have you heard other members talking about kids, actually, because you brought it up? So let's go to you.
Okay, well, thank you. So first of all, there's an adage that flies around YPO, which probably applies to all of us, but parents are only as happy as their saddest kid. Okay, so when somebody's in struggle, it's front of mind and gets in front of just about everything else, and so that becomes true. When it comes to talking wealth, I was with somebody just a couple of days ago that was really stressed because they're about to go very, very public with their company, and their kids are very concerned because their name's going to be everywhere, and they're just concerned about that, and so they've got a 16-year-old and a 8-year-old kids, and you know, how do they approach that? And in that sense, a lot of anxiety about doing the right business thing and doing the right thing in terms of creating wealth, but also the implications. And there's conflict. I don't know if there's a right or wrong. I think different family relationships handle these things quite differently. And in other cases, I've seen quite frequently where people try to shield their kids from it all, and you know, they'll wait until they're 28 years old, and they'll have a family meeting, and they'll go through the entire wealth structure of the organization and the roles of kids and everything else. And so some people take it head on, and all the way to try to keep them in the closet, if you will, and try to shield them as much as possible. But the kids begin to figure it out. So just how do you raise kids with the values that you have, given the fact that your circumstances have changed so dramatically and their lifestyles have changed so dramatically. And at first generation transition, it's just a constant source of angst among them. And it's just always on people's minds in some way, shape or form when they're willing to open up for you.
Yeah. Then how do families tackle that? I know the most common is not talk about it. Pretend that we are not rich. I've heard a lot of families, their response to, are we rich? Oh, no, we're not rich. We're right in the middle, which I guess is, depending on which segment they consider themselves into, which bracket that they might very well be in the middle, but it doesn't really help with the fact that kids, as they grow up, they need to plan for their life and they need to know what's coming their way. And financial literacy is a literacy, it's a life skills. And so maybe I should change the questions of how do you think the healthier communication approach ought to be if you can have some ways to mold and morph in a generational family communications regarding wealth. Anyone?
Yeah, I think a lot of our fears come from all the images we see. I mean, the image of the spoiled rich kid is so big in our heads. And the images of kind of the ugly wealth is in our heads. But I think if we really look at ourselves and live our values, our kids are watching us. And it's not as much about a conversation as the way our attitude and our sense of gratitude as we walk through the world, our kids are watching us. And that goes for kids as they're growing up. And then at the point where they start to, think about money and it's being as transparent as you possibly can be with your kids. And it's not easy because we don't have a muscle built around how to talk about money. But now at this point for me, I have two daughters, 21 and 23. And I really do see this generation difference and being aware of that and how different they are, their attitudes in the world, and listening to them. So how do we talk? We've kind of come to each other as two generations. My husband and I will come together and talk about what messages we want to give our kids, what questions we have for them. We give them the assignment of talking to each other, and then we come together and have a conversation. And we have so much to learn from this upcoming generation. They're kind of incredible, especially when it comes to philanthropy.
Mm-hmm. My husband and I, just between the two of us, we can't say we're a parenting expert at all. We only have two young kids. But one thing that has really worked for us is we check each other as well, Jen, is that we agreed that both of us should give less advice and ask more questions to our kids. Lisa, any comment?
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I think the worst thing you can do is pretend that it doesn't exist, because I just think kids are much brighter than they're often given credit for, and I think even little kids, and to say all of a sudden be living a wealthy lifestyle and you're going to whatever parties or events or jewelry or whatever it is, and you're telling your kids, oh, nothing's changed, is disingenuous and I think really unfair to the kids. I think it shows that dishonesty is valued more than other things in that family. And I think that's just a really bad idea. I know some people who take sort of an in-between approach and they say to the kids, we have money, but it's not yours. And so, you have nothing to do with it and you'll have to, and I think that's a little bit crazy because really? And do you really want to suggest to your kids that there's this big giant wall between them and you? I don't think that's a really healthy idea either. And I do think that talking about it, for me, and I'm guessing for many other people in this position, the most important thing for us was to model what it's like to be a person with means who also has appropriate values, who also values volunteerism, who values giving back, who values work, who values all of those kinds of things. And I think for me, I think that's the job of most parents. And I think that and this open discussion helps a lot.
Yeah. And this is one area that I think after having talked to these 20 extensively it's a hugely missed opportunities for nonprofits to tap into how can they help these families impart, transmit, demonstrate, illuminate the values that they hold so dear by helping others. Oftentimes, what I've seen is a very silo in a generational thing. This is what we do. This is what we would like to do. Kids, you stand aside and listen and learn and watch. There's even an individual in the 20s whose grown kids are in their 40s, but she's just a couple of years shy of that magic age that he and his wife had determined that they would be wholly owning their own asset. But she went to him for something that she wanted, and then he made him do a business plan. She's in her 40s. So people can have interesting ideas about what is the best way to bring their kids along. And so I think this is the best way to segment into the second part, is that given that there are just these unequal dynamics, how do we encourage fundraisers, nonprofits to start that conversation with you guys? Because Scott was elected into YPO and he was intimidated by other YPO members. And then imagine those who are not yet YPO candidate and talking to a big timer. Like, how do you even wrap around that meetings and setting that relationship? Can you guys share? Okay, this is actually
Esther, before we share, can I announce a book winner?
Ooh, thank you. I totally forgot. Have you already rolled your dice 3 times?
I did roll my dice, and we will be giving a copy of Jen's book, We Need to Talk, Memoir About Wealth, to the lucky winner is Lindy Lieserman. I hope I said that correctly.
Lindy Listerman, where are you? Yes. Where are you? Can you turn on your camera? And
she's on. Yep, she's in.
Camera's on. Mic's on now.
Yeah. Oh, hi, Lindy. How are you? Congratulations.
Thank you. I literally just bought your book, Jen. So if you want to give it to somebody else, that's fine too.
Or you can give it to someone else, and then Jen will sign the book to you and then send it to you. All right, Lindy, where are you calling in from, and who do you work for?
I'm calling from Portland, Oregon. I work for Mercy Corps. We do international development around the world.
Great.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah, this is very useful. Thank you.
Great to have you. Great to have you. Thank you, Rena. And so where were we? We're talking about how do you, this is the awkward bit. This is the bizarre part, that you have 2 groups of people need to work well together and establish authentic relationship, but there's inherent unequal power. Questions? Somebody asked, can you share your best meeting or set of conversations with a fundraiser? Do you have any?
I'll do it. So this is also a story from the book, but so apologies that it's not new, but it's very impactful for me, and I would love to see more of it. So when we first started giving, I decided that we sat down, we said, we really should have some priorities. You just don't want to kind of give willy-nilly. So one of the areas we wanted to give to is we wanted to give back to the community in Los Angeles where we live. And at that time, as it is now, there was a huge crisis in food banks and feeding people. There were a lot of people who were, had issues with putting food on the table, basically parents, kids, whatever. And we found out, I called a few food banks, and I found out that the food banks were running out of food about midway during the month. Not all food, but a lot of food. And I called somebody who knew from an organization called Big Sunday that did ongoing work with nonprofits all throughout Los Angeles, was co-sponsored by the city of LA. And I said, can we have a conversation? I'd heard about him, really great guy. And we sat down and had a chat. back in those before times when you could sit down and have a chat. And I said, I want to find out, it was just out of my head. And I said, how can I feed everybody who's hungry in Los Angeles for 3 months? Can you just tell me how much that would cost? And, you know, to fill up these food banks so that people had food for 3 months. And that just, I don't know, it still feels like a right question for me. And he said, I don't know, but which was, first of all, great answer. Lots of fundraisers wouldn't have said, I don't know. They don't think I want to hear that, but I loved him saying, I don't know, I'm going to go find out. So he did. And a few weeks later, he called me back and he said, I'm ready to meet. And I said, great. And he came over and I said, so what's the answer? And he said, the answer is that I'm not going to tell you. And I said, what? And I thought that was so strange. And he said, I'm not going to tell you because it's not sustainable. And this is an ongoing problem. And if we figure out how to, if you feed these people for 3 months, the problem will still exist. It's just going to be better. It's going to be, you know, can will be kicked 3 months down the line, but there's still a problem. So he said, I have an idea to create something, a sustainable program where you fund a person or a department that we can create that can work with people all over Los Angeles and create a system where they volunteer to, in different months, schools, churches, casts of TV shows, all different kinds, banks will all support a certain food bank or a couple of food banks for a certain period of time. And he says that way this can continue onwards. And I thought that was brilliant. I hadn't said I needed to be sustainable, but he was absolutely right. And it's been about, I think about 9-10 years, and the organization still exists and has helped, you know, hundreds of thousands of people to eat. So that was really a win.
That's really a striking story for me, Lisa, in this example, is that he happened to be someone who thinks high level strategically, sustainably. It's great that you want to feed people for 3 months, then what after 3 months, right? He wants to establish a more long-term, real problem solution thing. And that really hit the right mark with you. And that's kind of like meeting of the mind. I don't know if everyone is just like that. And so I just remember I've asked Scott to think about the persona of the YPO characters and how do they think about philanthropy? What is their sort of philosophy, if you will, of philanthropy and making impact? Because it's, although true that you have a lot of Lisa in the world, but there might be some that are not like that. So Scott, can you give us a big picture here?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for that. I'll generally group people into 4 different personas. And I think it would be helpful for all of you when you're connecting with somebody to listen carefully and figure out if the people you're engaging fit into one of these personas, and maybe a couple of them. It's not hard and fast or scientific. It's just my aggregation. So first off, especially among the first generation, younger folks coming up, there's this sense that I have to have impact. My motivation, the motivation that groups me into philanthropy is I want to have a bigger impact beyond my business, okay? And it's my business is important. I employ people, that's really meaningful. And maybe I can integrate sustainability and all kinds of things in my business. But when we're talking about philanthropy and wealth, it's I want to have an impact. And people are very motivated by making the world a better place beyond their business. The second group is may look a little bit the same, but these folks are really chasing their personal legacy. When we talk about their validation that they mattered, they want their name on the building big, okay? And they want credit for a really big contribution so that people will know that they went big, okay? And they're really trying to make sure that they mattered long after they're gone. Okay. And so that's a little bit different than the motivation behind somebody who's really just, who's focused on an impact broader than themselves. The legacy folks want some kind of credit to them or their family for the legacy of that. And then that really motivates people. It's not a bad thing. It's funded a lot of great things over, in history. So it's not bad, but that legacy motivation is pretty meaningful. Then there's the folks who just really want to convey this story. I've got it wired. Okay, they've got the perfect looking partner. They've got 3 different homes on all these different places. They want to be written up in all these fashion magazines and all these home magazines just about how great their stuff is. And being philanthropic is important to building out the model of having it all wired. And it's generally a defense mechanism to suggest, you know, that maybe there's other things there, but this I have it wired, and good philanthropy is part of the hygiene of being really a player and keeping in the game, if you will. And I see a lot of people playing that game, and it's more about how they're being viewed today, not necessarily into history. And then there's really, I don't know if it's early on, but I'm really busy, but I know I should do something. Okay, there's many first generation wealth people who are very, very engaged in their lives and in their businesses. They've got people coming, always peppering them, asking them. They want a piece of them all the time. Okay, they know they should do something philanthropically because they don't want to look like a pig. But at the same time, they're really busy, and they're really trying to fit all those parts together. So I've just seen over and over again that it seems like people fall into 1 or 2 of those personas pretty consistently when I'm at some of the events when we're talking philanthropy and having our philanthropic kind of events as it goes. Now, how you reach them could be quite a bit different, okay? In that, you know, there's ultimately three general paths to get them, which is doesn't really depend on the persona itself. And it's really, one, some people want to trust the organization, that the organization's done some good things, doing great things for them, and they just want to write a check and really trust management and the board to kind of continue carrying forth the mission. That's just, I trust it, and I want to allocate money to this hospital or this kind of approach, and I'm all in, and here you go. A part of the business approach that we see is also, I'm willing to give, but don't waste my money, okay? I measure everything in my business through metrics, and I'm gonna put some metrics to my contribution in my philanthropy. And as a result, if we succeed with our metrics, I'll feed you some more money, and we'll be able to say what we scored and how we scored it. And there's a metrics and performance that goes along with the money, as opposed to the leap of trust and faith in the first frame that I identified. And then the third group, I think, which I see really most often, is kind of the problem solver group. Okay, and Lisa's story was right on the heart of this. We're talking about what she just did a moment ago. But hey, you know, what problems are you having? I'd like to help you with a problem, okay? And or we can create win-wins through problem solving. And if you can characterize things as here's a solution, or here's a problem needing a solution. Let's figure out how we get to that together. I've seen YPOers and first generation entrepreneurs and other folks really get excited about that, because you're creating at that stage as well. So those 3 different approaches work on the 4 personas that I spoke to before. So just my anecdotal grouping of a lot of experience, but I hope that's helpful.
Super helpful, thank you. And I think even persona based on scientific research, it's a blunt instrument, but it's an instrument. It helps you start thinking about what their mental model is, which is just another way to say, what is their story? There's a story. What we mean by story is it's looking backwards, past events. But when people talk about story, it can also be looking forward. What is the mental model? And I think Scott, these mental models as reflected in their persona helps us think about how do you go about approaching them, thinking about what would be appealing to them. I want to just get really quickly deep dive into the weed, because I love those questions. And maybe Jen, we can start with you. What do you wish fundraisers did or said differently when starting a conversation about philanthropy? In other words, is there a particular approach that turned you off right away? Or maybe there's an approach that turned you on right away?
I want to say something before, can you hear me? I want to say that, donors don't always know what they're doing. They are new to this, and we all have a evolution that we go through with philanthropic giving. And a lot of times, I liked what Scott said, but there's another kind of piece there, that the donors want to do the right thing, and it can be overwhelming trying to figure out what that is. And there's a lot of fear that comes up. There's a fear of getting it wrong, which can just make people stuck. So I just wanted to mention that. I think the best thing that nonprofits could do is interact with the donor like a human being. Like, I get to know me, who I am, what I care about, find out what we have in common. And often if that thing that we have in common is, animal rights or environment or education to underserved communities, that's let's talk about that cause and join together around that cause and get to know me as a person. And I want to get to know you as a person, because that's what makes it powerful to me to have a real relationship with a nonprofit.
Okay, thank you. I want to bring Bob in on this one because Bob and I have been friends for a while, and then we co-founded this company, and then we talk about this for hours, and we can still talk about this for hours. I think fundamentally, people understand the importance of reaching someone on a personal level, but given that there's power differentials, there are specific styles or approach that Bob, you and I have talked about that really just does not resonate. But there are specific approach that also work well with you, because one, go to your LinkedIn, they realized you were the retiring president and COO in one of the largest conglomerate in Chicago, the Duchess Group, and then you're an investor, you've sat on all sorts of boards, and you were at one point the interim president of the University of Cincinnati Foundation. And don't be mistaken by his look to everyone. Bob and one of his other business partner were the one who brought the Chinese-focused American bank in Chicago. Okay, this is what I mean by don't be fooled by his look, okay? So I get into a room with you, Bob, I can feel a little intimidated, or just in a good way, right? Because I know you're not an intimidating person. So how should I start a conversation with you?
Well, I'll talk about a situation a month ago, and this might give a good example of how this might work. So I was up in Maine, at our house up in Maine, and I was working in the office up there, and it was in the afternoon, and I was eating my afternoon snack, a couple of cashews or something, and all of a sudden, a cap of my tooth fell off. Okay. And so I'm sitting there like the cap of my tooth just fell off. What do I do? I'm in Maine. My dentist is back in Chicago. So I called her up and I said, what do I do? And she said, well, I can get you in next Tuesday. I'm like, well, what do I do for 5 days? She said, just be careful. I said, okay, interesting. So I called a friend of mine up in Damerscott, Maine. And I said, Chris, I said, do you have a recommendation for a dentist that I could go see while I'm up here? I have the cap of my tooth fell off. He said, sure. So he gave that to me. So I called the office and they said, I'm sorry, are you a patient? I said, no, I'm not a patient. I'm sorry, we're not taking any new patients. So I called Chris back and he said, well, there's a place about 20 miles away. I think you might be able to get in. So I called the office and they said, come on in and we'll do something. And so I drove the 20 miles to Wiscasset, Maine, and I walked into the office, the Lincoln County Dental Association. I walked in, dentist is there. He took me back. He said, oh, this will be easy. 10 minutes later, he had the cap glued back on my tooth. You're probably wondering where this is going.
Yes,
and so I got up and I said, well, how much do I owe you? And he said, well, it's actually a day that we're closed, so I can't take any money. I don't know how to do this. He said, why don't you just make a donation? And I said, a donation? I said, I don't understand what you mean by a donation. He said, well, this is actually a charitable organization. There is no place in this county where children can go to have their teeth taken care of because they don't take Medicaid here. And there are so many unfortunate and poor children here. And so we set this up as a not-for-profit. And we volunteer our services to do this so children will have dental care. And now it's going to get really hard for me, okay? Because I've got a mouthful of metal in my teeth because I grew up very poor and we couldn't afford to go to dentists, okay? And so it was a long time before I ever saw a dentist in my life. And I'm like, wow, this is unbelievable. He was a fundraiser, okay, because he hit something in my heart that made a difference. I walked out of there and I wrote a check for $1,000. It's just like, this is unbelievable. I came home and I told my wife about it. I said, this is a charity we need to support. This is important. And that's, so what I'm trying to say here is fundraising is not about here. It's really about right here. And that's what we have to find. And that's what really hit me. And we're going to be supporting. I didn't know anything about this charity before I had the cap of my tooth fall off. So sorry for the long story, but this is all about the heart of people.
No, thank you. Thank you. I did wonder where this was going, but I know you, Bob, so I know it will land us somewhere wonderful, and you have. And indeed, it's not about here. They will ask you for what would be equivalent of a P&L in the private world. They'll look up your 990. But one very smart man said that logic makes you think, emotion makes you act. So I think we ought to have both. We ought to have our numbers straight. We ought to make sure that we have a good, solid book. We ought to have a good, solid plan. But to get people to do something, to act, I think we really have to get on the emotional level. Now, let's get to the third part. And I know, Rena, we need to raffle.
Yes, so our raffle winner for Lisa's book, Philanthropy Revolution, is Ryan Gennard. Hopefully I didn't say that incorrectly. Ryan, are you there?
Ryan, you must be present to win the prize. Where's Ryan?
Ryan, are you there?
Going once, going twice, Ryan. You got to roll the dice again, Rena.
All right, I'm rolling. Okay, then the next runner-up is Arlene Millen. Our next
Arlene,
winner. Arlene, are you there?
I'm here. Yes, thank you.
Can you turn on your camera? Where are you? I don't see you. I'm still looking for you.
I'm here.
Ah, hey. Okay, Arlene, you're saying hello to everybody. Where are you calling in from, and then what do you do? What organization do you work for?
I am calling in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I love the Leadership Story Lab. So nice to see you guys. And I am the executive director of Renew the I Do Foundation, and we inspire marriages to thrive in today's culture.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for all the work that you do for us on behalf of us.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, speak to the heart. Anything else you guys want to add? I'm just so stunned by Bob's story. I'm a little speechless right now.
I 100% agree that it's heart. I think there are three things a nonprofit should think about. It's a partnership mindset, personal relationships, and involvement. So that partnership mindset is really you approaching the donor that you are going to help them do what they want to do, which is have a positive impact. So you're helping the donor. Personal relationship, people give to people. I got to know the ED at my mother's group. I've continued to give to them. My daughter's now 24. The ED has changed, and I've gotten to know each one. They've done that really well, sharing their story, what's going on in that organization. And that's so important. And I was involved. Get your donors involved. I experienced the Mothers Group firsthand, so I was involved, but I've also given to, so Girls on the Run is another one that I support. I was a coach. And as a coach, I really learned about the program, and I interacted with girls, and now I'm a loyal donor. I've been on the board of an arts organization. I'm going to continue to give to them. My husband runs a nonprofit himself, and when he brings donors to his projects, he has a donor for life. Get your donors to see what you're doing and experience what you're doing, because that's part of the heart.
Jen, tell us just very quickly, what does David do? What does David nonprofit do again?
the co-founder and CEO of World Reader, which gets digital books into the hands of kids throughout the developing world. He started in Ghana, he's in Kenya, he's in Jordan working with Syrian refugees, he's in India. And now with the education crisis going on here in the United States, he's bringing World Reader with partnerships here to the US. So he's in Appalachia right now, he's in the Bronx, and he's bringing his digital reading program to kids who really need that educational boost.
Well, two very pragmatic questions here when it comes to really involving your donor, and that actually sitting on the opposite end, and that is, if an organization has lost several donors because they're disappointed with the administration, what is the best way to bring them back?
So I just wanted to point out something, answering that as well as pointing out something that Bob said. As well as what Jen said, if there's a real relationship, it's not like you have to go, lasso them and bring them back like this, because you'll have a real relationship with them. You'll have an authentic relationship with them, and you can talk to them and see what you'll actually know they're not going to give the next year, because you'll have a relationship with them. I can't tell you how many organizations I've talked to when I say, when's the last time you talked to your donors? And usually they talk to the top like 2% of the donors, and everybody else is like, chopped liver. So it's really, it's like you need to interact with your donors, and a relationship is not, you have money, I need money, I'm going to get your money, give me your money. That is not a relationship. And when people call it a relationship, it's very upsetting. The other piece that I wanted to point out, though, relative to what Bob said, is that dentist was not the head of fundraising for that organization. That dentist was somebody who believes with his heart in the organization, who lives it every day. And he didn't say, which in some instances, somebody might have said, oh, I'm going to have my fundraiser give you a call. He didn't say that, because everybody who's part of an organization, it should be, they should feel it, body and soul, feel the mission, and whoever they meet in whatever circumstance, if it seems appropriate, they're an ambassador of the organization. They can ask for money. It's not, oh, I have to go ask the fundraiser, that's their job. So I just wanted to point that out. And I think that was also another beautiful part of Bob's story.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bob, I think your story has really hit a chord here. So let's hit you with this one again, because I don't even know how to answer this. I don't know if there's an answer to this. Since the premise of our discussions, our conversations about first generation wealth, this question asked, where is the greatest concentration of first generation wealth? Is there any migration pattern within the US? In other words, how do you look for them? And this represents a whole bunch of other questions that have to do with, where do we find more donors? Where are they? Are they hiding under trees, or are they in some sort of mountains and they don't want to be found? Or are they the millionaire next doors? Where are they? How do you find donors?
Well, the answer to your question is yes. Okay, they are in all of those places. But I hadn't anticipated you were going to ask me that, but I did pull out some statistics last night when I was thinking about this. Mm-hmm. And so there are 123 million households in the United States, okay? 123 million households. That's according to the Federal Reserve System. The top 0.1% of the people in this country, 123,000 people, have an average net worth of $43 million, just to give you some numbers, okay? The top 0.5%, that's 600,000 people in this country, have an average net worth of $18 million. This is all based on the Federal Reserve numbers. There are 1.2 million individuals who are the top 1%, and their average net worth is $11 million. And the top 10%, 12 million people have an average net worth of 1.2 million people. So my question back to you, I guess I would say, Esther, is what are you shooting for here? Are you shooting for $10,000, $100,000, $1 million? What are you after? Because the answer to your question is going to be a bit more difficult. People who have a lot of wealth go out of their way to make sure you can't find it. I think Scott could talk to this. He knows exactly how this works. They don't own their homes. They're in sort of trust accounts. They have holding companies. They have all kinds of things. So how do you find these people? But there are some techniques to use. Data can get you there. And there are a number of different data companies, that provide this. We try to do some of this at ALUMinate, of course. And so you can do that. But of course, even with that data, you then have to apply the personal touch. So data alone is kind of interesting, but it really comes down to that, personal connection. And the hardest thing frequently is just getting that first meeting, and if you're lucky enough to get the first meeting, the second and third meetings are important, very important, because you're going to have to listen very carefully, and you have to practice this. In my mind, you have to practice in your own mind answering some questions when they start saying things like, I have a new grandson. What do you say when they say, I have a new grandson? What's your answer to that question? Or, I just sold my business, or my husband and I are separating. I mean, these are all life events in people's journey. And it's important that you be able to think about how you respond to that, and how you respond to those type of statements are going to really have an impact, I think, upon where fundraising goes from there, because there's your opportunity to really connect.
Yeah, yep. Well, with that in mind, I want to share some observations. Thank you, Bob and Jen and Lisa and Scott. We've talked about what is wealth. What does it mean to be wealthy? What does that do for one's relationships and friendships and family? How do you level with a donor given the power in a power unequals in the relationship? And then how do you reach that win-win? From having done the studies and talked to these 20 people and reading it, literatures and studying statistics related to wealth, I'd really encourage you guys to think about at least taking one of these three actions. The message is important, but so is the messenger. So what is your story? And I don't mean just your organizational stories. You have to get that right. But oftentimes what I heard fundraisers shied away from is their own personal story. Oh, it's not about me. It's about the cause. It's about the organizations. Well, that's true. But who are you as a messenger? Do I trust you as a messenger? And what is your story, whether it's related to the organizations that you work for or not? Because in the studies that through this opportunity to talk to these 20 ultra high net worth folks, only about a quarter of them considered fundraisers as their peers, more or less, as even friends. And strangely, on the opposite end, a quarter of them, when they heard the word fundraiser, they default to events. When I took it just by granted that I'm only talk about people, fundraisers are people, fundraisers are not events. And yet that's the only relationship that they have with fundraisers. And 100% of them do not level with their fundraisers. Well, why not? Because there are something that are aligned here inherently. And I believe that if you have your story figured out, brief and brilliant, for yourself, the messenger, as well as for the organization, then there's an opportunity to really have a true open dialogue conversations, just like Jen would like us to do. And so that's what my life work is about, It's to figure out what is each of our story as well as our organizational stories so that we can align and find each other's humanity. The second thing I think Bob alluded to is not just let the story do the work, let your data do the work. Now, I know there are a lot of conventional ways that you use data, such as your capacity scores, such as knowing where they live, if they have secondary homes and things like that. But there are actually a lot that data, accessible, publicly available data that you can get your hands on, and together craft a more three-dimensional picture of who your potential donors might be and who they care about. One of the things that Bob and I talk endlessly about is life stages, right? So there are employment data that we can get our hands on, and understanding that CEO of a one-woman show or CEO of a 500 people company. Well, how do you know how many people that their company have? Well, just so that the Paycheck Protection Act actually allowed us access to that total data. So let your data do the work. If you're interested, we'll be happy to show you a demo of how do you first of all make sure that you have good data hygiene, right? That you're looking at Bob Fealy, which is different, maybe different from Robert Fealy, and then is he still at this address, and so on and so forth. And then the last thing is that oftentimes engagement process, from what I've experienced, could have a bigger potentials in terms of aligning with the needs and the struggles, as well as the aspirations that first generation wealth creators have. So which one will you take? Think about it. The polling didn't work, so if everybody could just quickly type in 1, 2, or 3, 1, 2, and 3, or none of the above.
While you do that, I can announce the last book winner. The winner of Esther's Let the Story Do the Work will be Nancy Garcia. Are you there, Nancy?
Must be present to win.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Nancy. Where are you calling from?
Nancy.
And what good work do you do?
I am a board member at the Cherokee Family Violence Center, where we work with victims of domestic violence, and we also have a wonderful housing program.
Nice. Great. Thank you, Nancy. I can't wait to send my book to you. All right. So, let's see. All of the above, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, all of the above. Great. They're keeping coming. 2, 1, 3. Holding you to it. I have no way of holding you to it, but I'm holding you to it. And the last thing I just wanted to share is really just observations, not just observations, but they're curious about wealth. Typically, it doesn't last past 3 generations. It's kind of scary, but it's true. In every single cultures, there's these adage, cliche, almost shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, rice field to rice field, whatever is prominent thing in that culture, 3 generations. And coincidentally, proven by research, family business typically also do not last past 3 generations. And so knowing that that's the case, and knowing that people don't lose their wealth by the 3rd generations because they've given it away all to charity, that rarely happens. It's usually due to some sort of mismanagement because of lack of communications, lack of financial literacies, and so on, intergenerational harmony. They really need to create a healthy wealth identity. And that's the definitions within a book called Stranger in Paradise. And the author equate first generation wealth creators as immigrants, having left their native land and landed in the land of wealthy, where they find the custom, value, language, practice, cultures, all very, very, very strange and often incompatible. And yet they have native born sons and daughters and grandchildren. But what's interesting about this new land is that the second and third and subsequent generations can get deported back to harsher conditions where they first came. And so to me, the opportunity here is that development officers have something incredibly valuable to offer to these first generations wealth creators. But in my research, in my experience, in my conversations with first gens, it's not particularly obvious to me where, what, when, how can development officers be helpful and offer value, and importantly, become an advisor, not a fundraiser, and an advisor, so that together we can better deploy our capital to solve the many worthwhile causes that you guys are all trying to solve. I'll end here. I'll see if there are any more questions for our panelists. And I really want to thank Lisa, Jen, Bob, and Scott. It is not very often that we have a 90-minute, close to 90-minute conversations, no lecture, and just about what are we thinking, what are we feeling, what have we seen? And it's not very often that you hear directly from major gift donors. So I really appreciate your stories, your insight, and 30,000 foot view, Scott. If you enjoy this type of conversation, let us know. We have a quick evaluations. I am wondering if there might be another one. I think now I know that there are so many academics and experts, donors who are actually willing to talk. I think there could be another one. I don't know. But if that's something that you are find helpful, let us know. And best of luck with everything that you've done.
Do you have a second for a question for Lisa?
Sure. Lisa, is that okay?
Lisa mentioned right at the beginning that it was very difficult to give away $2 million to a hospital.
Yeah.
I'm curious what the mistake the hospital made was and why you stuck with it.
I stuck with it because with the risk of having a whole bunch of fundraisers call me in the next 5 minutes, I'm really bad at saying no. So I didn't know any better, and I just stuck with it. And also, I didn't want to go to a different hospital. This was the hospital that was our hospital that my kids had gone to and my husband had gone to for years. So I didn't want to change that. The reason why I believe that they didn't, I'm reasonably certain the reason why it took so long and they ignored me is because they didn't believe me. They just didn't. I mean, there's stories, a lot of stories out there like this, but they could have, it was public information. They could have easily known, looked it up, and they just chose not to. And because I wasn't one of the regular people, I was therefore suspect. And so that's what happened. The good news about it is it became a teachable moment, because Cedars was later on after it happened and I explained what had gone on and got more involved in the organization. They actually made this part of their onboarding program for all development people at the hospital, the medical center. They all have to hear this story, no matter what level they are, so that it never happens again.
And now thank you, Lisa. And here's a chance that nobody should miss. And I'm very sorry, I totally blanked out on this one. I thought I took care of the raffle, like I can high five myself, but actually I forgot one very important thing. Jen, tell us about Half My Daff and why no one should miss this opportunity.
Yeah, we had started a challenge last year, and we moved $8.6 million from donor advised funds to nonprofits in 5 months. We're doing it again this year, and we have $3 million we want to give away to nonprofits. So all of you are eligible. There's nothing you really have to do except for go to your DAF donors and get them to commit to halving their DAF, give to you, and you'll be eligible for a matching grant from us. And there's a website that you can kind of find more information, go to the instructions page. Our goal really is to inspire giving and to get DAF donors to move that money through, because there's a lot of money sitting in donor advised funds right now. And there's so much work that you guys are doing and that needs to get done. And we want to help move that money through. So check us out. I hope that you can kind of rally some of your donors who have donor advised funds to commit to having their DAF and give to you, and that you get a matching grant from us.
Jen, how much money approximately are actually stuck in DAF?
There's $140 billion, and I think it's more than that actually. And just to put a framework around that, NASA's yearly budget is $23 billion. So there's like 5 times NASA's budget stuck in donor advised funds. That's charitable dollars that aren't being put to work. And we're really passionate about trying to get that money unstuck and out to work to help people in need.
Yeah, yeah. So Jen, thanks to you and David for this work. What people decide to do with money is not rational. It has very little to do with what they know to be right financially, but more to do with what they've experienced with money during their formative years. So for example, CEOs who started their careers during recessions, they tend to be way more risk averse. And we're talking about future decisions, actions, but that is hugely determined and influenced by their past experience. And so there's all these irrational reasons for why money aren't being put to use for what they should be. And we're just very grateful for folks like Jen and David for putting the mechanism in place to get it unstuck. But we need you guys to spread the word and let your DAF owning donors know that, hey, here's an opportunity to double your impact. Thank you for that questions. We will send you a summary of the high points. A couple of my team members have been taking notes. So we'll include the very helpful stats that Bob quoted us. And I'll also include a couple of websites that were mentioned here. And then most important thing is, let me scroll back to one of the 3 actions. Nothing will be different if you don't do something. So I don't know if it's 1 or 2 or 3 or none of the above, you have a perfect plan. Never more of the same is what I believe in. And I hope that even just by modeling how this webinar is facilitated, how it's executed, how it's shared with you guys, I just encourage you guys to take what you have learned today and do something with it. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Esther.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, I know we have a lot of fundraisers on this call. I think we should thank them, for the work that they're doing, frankly. I met a lot of them, and I know how difficult this is. You started this by saying that, and what a noble profession, if you want to call it a profession. I think it's a cause, it's a mission. But I think we are really a great thanks to all of the fundraisers who are out there just trying to make a difference in the world.
Because it is bizarre and awkward work, very difficult, but you do it, and it's noble cause. It takes work. So thank you, everyone, for, in addition to your work and spending 90 minutes of your time. So we hope we've done your time right by offering you something helpful and useful. Let us know if there are other topics. Let me know if there are other topics that you think you would like to hear. I don't know much, but I'm very curious about first generation wealth creators. And I think now I know more than most people. I don't know much, but I know more than most people. So, and anything that I don't know, that I'm curious about, I'll go find it for you. Just like I recruited Bob and Scott and Jen and Lisa, I'll go find other people and find the answers for you.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you, Esther's team, too. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joanna. And Rena.